Okay, hi Pontoon. Welcome to Taboo Tuesday. This week we are talking about breastfeeding. So we have a group of our awesome moms together who have had varying experiences with breastfeeding and pumping. And so we're just going to jump into it. There's a lot around breastfeeding that's super taboo. If you've done it or if you haven't done it, this is going to be an awesome conversation to kind of listen into. So if everyone kind of just wants to start with what their generalized experience was, I think it'd be good for everyone to kind of set a baseline of where we were at.
Yeah, I can start. My breastfeeding journey was short both times. Um, with my first, it was a sore subject because it led to some really bad CPD. But going into my first, I had all this pressure, like, breastfeed, breastfeed, breastfeed. It was like a lot of pressure to breastfeed. So I let that get the best of me with my first. And so I made it 5 weeks with her, and then just taking that whole experience into my second. So with her, I exclusively pumped. I made it about 10 months of pumping, and then going into my second, I didn't want to go through all of that again, so I gave myself kind of like, if he wasn't latching or he wasn't successfully breastfeeding by the time we left the hospital, I wasn't going to put that same pressure on myself because I didn't want to go down that same road. Unfortunately, he had a different journey leaving the hospital, and he ended up never latching. And now he has all this sort of food allergy. So I didn't really breastfeed with him. We attempted a couple of times, but we really didn't breastfeed with him. So the actual breastfeeding journey itself was pretty short for me. But if pumping long term was with my first, I can give some feedback there.
I guess I can hop in next. I had set the bar really low for my expectations because everyone leading up to it was like, oh yeah, it's super easy, like no problem. And so I just, like, people kept saying that. And so I kind of went in thinking the opposite, like it's gonna be hard because I don't know, I just never knew what to expect. And so when Caleb was born, I ended up having like a fever when he first came out, and I had some infection. And so I don't know if that like translated to like the initial struggle with it, or if Caleb was just like, he was really calm and when he first came out. And so they literally were just like, okay, breastfeed. And I was like, what? Like, I don't know what you're like. I was out of it because I had like a whatever fever. Caleb was like just kind of like chilling. And so it was just really strange. And I was like, this isn't working. This isn't happening. So immediately it went to like, oh, he's not latching. This is a problem. And so it was like a long journey in the hospital, but like I just like kept with it. And I don't know how detailed you want to get like right now, but we ended up having to like triple feed. So I was like using a nipple shield. We would stick like a syringe with like a long tube into the shield so that he could try to nurse from me and get like some milk from it to try to get it to happen. So we did that in the hospital. So then I would nurse him, then he would take a bottle, and then I would pump. So it was like a really long process every single time he fed. And we did that for like, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks until his weight went back up. And then I had to use a nipple shield until he was like 2 months old. And that was really challenging because I felt like I couldn't like go out and leave the house really, because putting on that little shield, it was 2 hands and you had like, I had my pillow, like it was like a full experience. So that kind of was a long journey until the 2 months when he finally was able to latch. And then I had like a full week of that pain that I think everyone may experience at the very beginning, but then now he's 2 months old, so he's like much stronger. So it was like the first like 10 seconds of him latching was like excruciating. And then it was fine. And then after we worked through that, it was much better. And he direct nursed until he was like 9 months. And then then I just went exclusively pumping, and now I'm only pumping once a day. So
Woo-hoo.
long story, hopefully condensed into like a shorter one. I can elaborate on more things later.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mara, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, I'll hop in. So for me, I didn't have much of a understanding going into it. I would say one of my biggest regrets of pregnancy was not using the time in pregnancy when I had the headspace and the sleep and the physical body not being a complete disaster to research and know what I was getting into. Because I felt very overwhelmed. I thought like it's something that's going to come easily to me. It's such a like important, like natural like part of the early postpartum experience. Like my body will figure out how to get the baby out of me. My body will figure out how to make the milk happen, and my baby will figure out. And I just like assumed I would be able to go with the flow and it would be really easy. And I was really overwhelmed with how hard the breastfeeding part was, how many different moving pieces there were to figure out, how much pressure I was putting on myself to be making enough milk. And yeah, I found it really difficult. I struggled with a lot of postpartum anxiety about a number of different things, but the breastfeeding piece was a really big part of it for me. I really wanted to try and breastfeed as much as I could. And I had a like medium time with it. I had a really, really traumatic, like physically traumatic birth experience, which I'm sure we'll get into on another episode. But the kind of biggest, most important part of that is I basically like fractured my tailbone during childbirth. And so the act of sitting upright for the beginning of my recovery was incredibly painful. And that made the breastfeeding part really difficult because all of the seated breastfeeding positions really hurt. And I had to figure out how to modify and be in a situation that wasn't going to cause me a ton of pain. So that was really difficult for me. And ultimately, I made it about 10 or 11 months exclusively breastfeed, or about 9 months of exclusively breastfeeding, another like month of like kind of starting to supplement a little bit, and then fully weaned around the first birthday, largely my daughter deciding to kind of wean, I think because I had just kind of started slowing down in my production and I wasn't going to stress myself out by that point trying to get it back up. And so we just kind of had a nice natural experience with it being a gradual transition. So it was really nice because I was expecting that part to be incredibly stressful, and that thankfully was the part that was actually pretty easy for me, all things considered. But yeah, it was the breastfeeding part. I really wanted to be on this call because I felt like the breastfeeding part was something I was super under-equipped for. And I wish I had more expectations of like what can go wrong with it and what is totally normal. And yeah, so I just think it's a really important conversation to have. But that's kind of my summary. Sam, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'll share next. So it's kind of, I mean, my first experience, I have two boys. My first experience was definitely like I was not prepared. Like I knew absolutely nothing about breastfeeding. I just thought like, yeah, you just put them on and there's milk and you feed them and they're nourished and happy. Like it's just so easy. I mean, and nobody in my family really breastfed. Like my mom didn't, so she didn't know anything about it. And my mother-in-law had a whole different experience with breastfeeding too. So like whenever Brantley was in the hospital in the NICU for 5 days, I was just like, I didn't pump. Like I didn't know that I needed to be pumping, even though that he was getting formula bottles. And so by the time we went home, like I just could not keep up, and I just was driving myself crazy. Like I don't understand why, and I didn't understand supply and demand, like any of that. And so at like 2 weeks, Adam was like, you know, mentally, like you were just driving yourself crazy, and like if you think that it's something that you need to stop doing, like it's fine. He's already taking more formula than anything. Like, let's just do that. And I really beat myself up over it. I like struggled because I was like, this is something I wanted to do, and it just didn't work out. So I knew that whenever we had a second one, that I was like, this time, like, I'm going to do all the research. I'm going to find out everything that I need to do to make this work. And so I really went into it like, this is going to be easy. Like, I know everything now. I know all the research. I'm going to pump every 30 minutes if I have to make sure that I have what I need. And then Callahan got jaundice whenever he was born. And in order to like get rid of the, jaundice in his body, he has to poop a lot, and my milk was not in. And so I remember the nurse in the hospital was like, hey, like, he needs to be eating a lot more. And he's just really sleepy. He doesn't really want to nurse. So like, what do you think about a formula bottle? And she like looked at me whenever I said it, and I like started like getting tears in my eyes. And she was like, hey, like, I just want you to know, like, it's okay. Like, you can still breastfeed, and we'll still pump, and we'll still get that. But just for right now, like, let's just try to give him a formula bottle. And I'm so thankful that she was like so kind about it, but still encouraging about the breastfeeding part about it. Cause then we went home and we continued, like pumping and nursing and formula bottles for the first 2 weeks until his bilirubin levels were good. And at that point, I had already started building up a stash. So that definitely helped me to feel a lot more comfortable giving him that formula in the beginning, to the point where the rest of our breastfeeding journey, we're still breastfeeding. I'm not pumping anymore during the day whenever I'm not with him, but anytime I'm with him, like, I'm not saying no to him, and we're still nursing throughout the night. But and we've been able to make it this far, 12 months, with only the formula in the beginning. So I feel like it's been really successful, but I know in the beginning I had really high expectations, because I was like, okay, this time I did my research, and it still didn't go as planned. And so I'm thankful that formula was able to, in the first time with Brantley, be able to give me that mental space to be able to quit whenever I needed to, or I guess not quit, but stop whenever I needed to. And formula with Callahan was able to help me get my supply going, to where we could be at a point to where we could continue and make it the year and more of breastfeeding.
My experience is similar to a lot of yours. Lachlan is my second. So with Ronan 9 years ago, I went into it kind of thinking like, oh, breastfeeding, it's just what everybody does. You have a boob and the baby eats from it, and that's just how it works. And it's so easy. And I needed a nipple shield. And so that was a shock with him. And then, we had some health stuff go on in there as well. And so we ended up nursing for that entire 17 months that I nursed him with a nipple shield, because he just wouldn't latch without it. And I had kind of that same mentality as a lot of you, like with your first time, like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to commit to it, and I'm not going to waver from it, even if my mental health like struggles a little bit. Like, it's just what moms are supposed to do. Right. But I wasn't gentle with myself. And so this time around, I decided that, I'm going into this with my eyes a little more open. I'm not going to have these unattainable expectations for myself when I don't know what our circumstances are going to be. We don't know what baby is going to do. We don't know how effective a nurser he's going to be. So there were so many things that I knew now were elements that I couldn't prepare for. It was just one of those things where you're like, you just got to wait and see what's going to work. And Lachlan, luckily, once he was born, latched on immediately, no nipple shield. And we've been going gangbusters ever since. We did supplement a couple of feedings with formula in the earlier days. I would pump, but he wouldn't take breast milk from a bottle, which was really crazy for me. He was like, that's not supposed to come from that. So he definitely didn't want breast milk from a bottle, but he would take formula from a bottle, which came in handy when I was gone in the evenings working and Chell was home with both boys and needed to be able to like feed him and fill him, and then also give him more if he needed it, and not be worried about like, well, should I thaw out more milk, or did she pump enough? Or so For me, breastfeeding this second time around was so, and still is, so much more of like a leisurely process than it was the first time around. And I'm really glad that I've had both experiences, but I'm also really glad that I'm like ending my childbearing years, woof, um, with with such a special like experience with him, because he's still nursing. He's still nursing 4 or 5 times a day total, and I couldn't imagine it being any different. I'm ready. Like, I think that a lot of times, I don't know if we're going to talk about weaning also in the breastfeeding experience here, but I wasn't ready with Ronan until like, 15 or 16 months. And I'm ready with Lachlan. Like if he was tomorrow was like, nah, I'm good. I'd be like, okay, cool. It's fine. So that's also been a different experience for me, but that's my experience in a nutshell.
I'm curious to know who all supplemented with formula or went to formula at some point, because I feel like for me, at least personally, from a breastfeeding perspective, it was either you breastfeed or you don't. And
Yeah.
in my mind, I was like, oh, well, there's no other option. We either are breastfeeding or we're not. And I can't supplement with formula because that means she'll be on formula 100%. And I don't want that, which is stupid because I love formula now that she's on it. I'm like, you go, girl. We're great. So I'm curious who, I know that, Amelia, you said you kind of did. Sam, you said you guys did at the beginning.
Yeah, we did. So at the hospital, they offered donor milk for me at the beginning. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, heck, like totally. To be honest, I never had like that mindset that like the one or the other. I think for me, it was like, I could care less as long as this kid's getting fed. And so I didn't really I didn't put that pressure on myself as far as like, I have to do this. It was more of like, sure, like everyone's helping me try to figure this out. It was a long journey, but it was like nice that there was that support at the hospital. So we did donor milk at first. And then I want to say they gave us some formula that we took home at the beginning. So because since we were triple feeding, I would nurse him whatever he would take with the shield or the syringe thing. And then he would take a bottle of breath or formula, and then I would pump. So then as I was pumping and starting to kind of get a little bit from the pumping, and then when my milk came in, then when he would take a bottle, he would take my breast milk. So it was like at the beginning, it was formula, or at the hospital donor milk, until I had enough milk from pumping. And then we continued kind of that triple feed of me pumping after I fed him for a while. I don't remember how long. So then that was that. And then he ended up having a dairy intolerance later on in life. So that was like around 6 months. So then when it came to a point when I needed to supplement with formula, our options were definitely limited because of the dairy intolerance. So then I literally bought every single formula that was dairy free that I could find. But he wouldn't take anything, none of it. And then now he finally drinks that Ripple protein milk. But yeah, we tried all the things, everything we could possibly find.
That's crazy. How long, you said, when did you stop triple feeding? I can't remember.
It had to have been at least a month, maybe.
And did you do it for every feed? Yeah.
Yeah. So even in the middle of the night when I'd get up and I would nurse Caleb, and he would nurse with the shield, it took longer. So his nurse sessions were like 40 minutes. He would go from like 20-ish on each boob. So it was like a 45-minute nurse sesh. And then when he was that little at night, then he would like burp him, whatever. And then I'd put him back to bed. And then I would stay up and I'd pump for another 20 years. I forget how long I would pump for, another 20 minutes. And then it was like, I'd only have like another 45 minutes, maybe. I forget at that point, to sleep because they're up every so often. So then it was like, okay, I got another 45 minutes, go to sleep. And then it was like this cycle all this time. And it was exhausting, but I kind of told myself, you know, in the beginning, like I was home with Caleb. I didn't have to go back to work till when I was kind of ready. And so I just was like, you know what, like this is my job essentially, is to just figure this out for him. I got nothing else to do. So I just kind of took it as my job was to do that. And like, I mean, I just watched a ton of TV and Netflix and shows and stuff. So that kept me, I think, more sane. And I'm kind of like a homebody in that sense.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the awesome things about breastfeeding is the baby, especially in the early days when you're doing it so much, your baby's so small that they don't give a shit what you are actually spending your time doing. And you can have TV on and you like eat. My favorite was like having Riley on the breastfeeding pillow and having food and like eating it over her and trying not, I feel like one of the rites of passages is like trying not to like drop the food on your baby that you're eating over them while they're breastfeeding.
I used to have like the largest spoon I could find in the house to feed it.
Yeah, you get your like other hand underneath to try and like be an extra dry
trying not
shield.
to move your boob at all. You're like, okay, so I can only move
I will fully admit that I have licked something off of my son's head while he's nursing. So
the other like classic piece of being a breastfeeding parent that I feel like is not talked about enough is just the fact that when you are breastfeeding, you're constantly walking around the house. I assume other people are like this, maybe with just like one boob just like fully out and like run into the kitchen with like a boob hanging out to like stuff your face with a bit of food while you like have a second. And I just like kept catching myself in the mirror and being like my hair being up in like a crazy bun and like one boob just like fully flopped out and like
and I was
like,
doing the
haka liquid on the floor. It's just like such a disaster.
I used the haka also in the beginning stages to try to like stimulate everything and get more milk in. So I was just full both out. So then when my parents were here, I told my dad, I said, I'm just letting you know, like, this is how it is. And like, you can be here or not. And so anyone came over, I was like, they're out. So if you're here, you're here. Otherwise you can go somewhere else.
I was going to say, I remember early on a latch, like that was the biggest struggles. And we ended up finding out she had a lip tie and a tongue tie, which we later had corrected, but she wouldn't latch. She was tearing my nipples. Like I was bleeding pretty much 24/7 from her the first several weeks. And I remember them being so extremely sensitive. I literally was holding myself in the shower so the water doesn't hit them. It was just like, I don't know where that thought came from what Mara was saying, but things that aren't talked about, literally, like they felt like razors because she was tearing them apart.
Yeah. Julie, I know when did you switch over to pumping for her?
I was actually sitting in this I'm going to cry about this. I was sitting in this very chair and I had laid her on my lap on a pillow, and we were trying yet again. I think we were trying probably 4 or 5 times a day to get her to latch. And this was right after she had the correction done, and I couldn't get her to latch. And at that point, my husband had pointed out to me that I was going down a path of postpartum depression. I was sitting in this chair trying to get her to latch because she just had the correction. It's supposed to work. She's supposed to just nurse now, right? No, it didn't happen. And so I just stared at the bottle that was on the table next to me. She still wasn't latching. And after about 3 minutes, I just like sobbed and let it go. Like, okay, we're done. We're not doing it. You're taking a bottle. You're happier with the bottle. I'm happier with the bottle. And at that point, it led me down a path of like obsessing over pumping, which is a whole nother story. But at that very moment, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulder.
So when you had switched over to exclusively pumping for her, when you left the hospital, were there resources given to you for pumping? Because I feel like the breastfeeding and pumping concept is like this whole separate divide, which something could be a whole.
Nope. I got my support and my learning. I Google but I found a Facebook group that was very helpful with exclusive pumping. So all of the moms in that group were exclusively pumpers. So I learned about oversupply, which I had both times with both of my kids.
Okay.
Julie, are you there? Oh, you froze, Julie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You were saying your mastitis that came from your over pumping or over producing.
Overproducing. Yeah. So I got mastitis several times. I had clogs. I learned about sunflower lecithin that nobody talks about. And I'm like, give your body all it can take of that crap when you're pumping. But it was a Facebook group for exclusively pumpers. That's why I learned, and circle has grown, and I didn't need it this time because our journey was very, very short this time, but at least I was able to provide some help to some of the moms here.
Yeah, I was gonna say I definitely didn't know about mastitis until I think Caitlin got it, and then like a month or so later, I ended up getting it, and then I was like thankfully, like there was some of y'all in the group. I mean, not thankfully that y'all went through it, but like thankfully that y'all were able to give me resources and stuff because I had no idea. And then like, which is so random because I'm not pumping anymore during the day, and I haven't been for like 3 weeks now, and we're just kind of like nursing when he wants to, and it hasn't been a big deal. But then Friday night, right before our trip, I got a clogged duct, and I was just like in so much pain. And so I was like, I already know what to do, like all the vitamins and the ibuprofen, and I felt like it was like newborn stage again, trying to get this clogged duct out, and all the ibuprofen and everything. And so I mean, I'm thankful for, Julie gave us a lot of tips, like going through all of that, but I didn't know any of that either. So, definitely my research before still didn't even prepare me for the different things, so thankfully I was able to have y'all to give me that extra support to keep me going.
I remember leaving the hospital because at the hospital, they like push this button twice. And then at this point, push this button. And it was like the hospital pumping machine. So I was like, okay, so I figured that out. Right. And then I get home and I was like, oh shit, I have no idea how to use my pump. Not even a clue. And I was like, I need to do that right now. I'm supposed to pump right now. So thankfully I had bought the breastfeeding course from our Queen Carrie, and thank the good Lord for that, because I hopped on there and I was like, looked through her course, and it was like pumping. And then it was like, okay, I had a Spectra, boom, boom. And then I just like went through and I like pretty much just like took a little course on how to do it. And then it was like, I was fine. But if I didn't have that, they didn't ask me at the hospital, okay, what pump do you have? Like, how can we help you with that? I mean, they handed me a bunch of papers, but it's like,
you just had a baby.
Yeah. The last thing I'm going to do is pop through this 200-page book and look for something, So I was thankful for that.
So you're not thinking about,
here you go.
Right. Here's your newborn guide.
Yeah, you're definitely not thinking about pumping when you leave the hospital. It's kind of an afterthought that most moms end up having to do at some point. And that first time you go to do it, you have no idea what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. There's so many buttons, and I don't even know like what, the little bacon looking button.
Yep.
And everyone responds differently.
Bacon mode.
I'm curious, do you guys have lactation consultants who
yes
in after birth versus just like at the hospital kind of thing?
Yes, I did. Thankfully, one of my mom's a nurse, and she works with a doctor whose wife was a lactation consultant. And so my mom had put me in contact with her. And so we talked on the phone a few times, and she was wonderful. I could text her, so I was like beyond grateful that I had that resource. And then at the hospital, because we were having such a struggle with Caleb latching, they even brought in an occupational therapist that came in, and she was absolutely incredible. Like she was like, this is fine. He's got a good like suction, like his suck is good. She was like really reassuring with everything. And we had a lactation consultant come in. So it was like the hospital was really good with that information. I'm pretty sure they gave me a handout of like who you can call after. But I was like 100% all in of like, who can help me? Where can I find their information? Because Google's scary. So I wanted to like talk, like you guys were like incredible too, because most of us were going through the same thing. So it was like, hey, I found this out. And so like, man, couldn't have gotten through a lot of that without you guys for sure.
Well, and each one of us, when we were going through something, went through different problems at different times in our kind of journey. And so when we were working because our group text is just one large group text, like if two people were going back and forth helping troubleshoot a specific thing, you'd still like have the ability to read all of that back and forth. And I think it was really helpful then when you were going through something that you already had heard two people in the group chatting about something. My experience with lactation consultants, so I didn't work with anyone early on, but I got into a pretty good rhythm with breastfeeding. Riley was had been steadily gaining on like another thing that I was like really obsessive about was the damn growth charts, which we can get into, but frick, like I want to do all of the swear words for those growth charts, but I'll restrain myself.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
she was doing really well. She was latching, she was getting her milk. And then we had the good fortune that around 3 or 4 months, she started sleeping for pretty long chunks at night. And I was so glad and so excited to get some sleep back. And something that we in our group would constantly joke about is like when we'd wake up and our boobs were like hard as rocks and so painful as a kind of like badge of honor that we had a good night's sleep, and I thought it was like funny and like here's this funny thing to joke about. And then at Riley's next check-in, she had dramatically slowed down on her weight gain. And when you're exclusively breastfeeding and you're not pumping and you're not doing formula, you have like zero idea how much milk they're actually getting. And they can be on the boob for the same amount of time, but just be kind of like comfort nursing and not actually drinking. And it can be really hard to tell what that distinction is. And I had a huge spiral, and I was furious that no one had told me that if my baby starts sleeping through the night earlier than expected, it could mean a big dip in my supply. I just, again, assumed bodies know how this works, and you get to an age where, of your baby's age, where like if they start sleeping through the night, your body like knows, okay, just because we're not like taking milk out during the night as much, like doesn't mean that we should really slow down production during the day. And I think it kind of depends person to person, but for me, it was a really dramatic drop in my supply. And I was really stressed about it. And I ended up hiring a lactation consultant at that about like 3 or 4 month mark to help me figure out how to change my my nursing schedule to try and increase my supply and manage to get it back on track. But yeah, it was really frustrating. And my doctor and my lactation consultant basically told me that the best thing that I could do would be to start waking her up in the middle of the night to feed her, which I thought was insane. I was like, are you seriously telling me that I've spent the last 3 or 4 months trying to get her to sleep through the night, and now you want me to wake her up in the middle of the night to feed her? Like, how is that possibly the right thing to do? So that was weird, I guess is the summary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had lactation consultants both times. I had a really bad experience with the hospital lactation consultants that I had in the hospital for my daughter. And they kept telling me she didn't have latches. And then I finally got it checked out and she ended up having latches. So that's when I took it upon myself to get my own lactation consultant. And that was so much more helpful. And then I don't know if Sam had the same experience as I did with my second, but there was a specific lactation consultant for my son in the NICU. And it was like a whole different ball game because they were so much more understanding of pumping and nursing and the importance of both. When they're hooked to tubes and they've got a feeding tube and there's nothing you can do, you can't even hold your baby, she's going to help you learn how to pump. She's going to help you do all these things. So it was a lot different. And I 1,000% would want a NICU lactation consultant any day over another lactation consultant. So my experience with them was very, very different.
Yeah, I don't want to go too long on that, like just adding on, but like, yeah, I felt like in the NICU, they were definitely, even though they were giving Brantley formula, they were super supportive of like, you know, I even asked them like, okay, do I continue formula at home? They're like, no, just breastfeed him. Like it's fine. Like, just keep doing what you're already doing. Like, and then I didn't have as much like, I guess like knowledge or support at home whenever we were there. And that's kind of why I stopped. But like in the NICU, like they were like, no, like you're doing great. You're doing good. And then with Callahan, I had a little bit of thrush because I had, I don't know if I even told y'all, but the doctor had messed up my strep B or test, that, I don't know, butt swab test, whatever it is. And I never got my results back on time for me to go into labor. So they gave me antibiotics before they could break my water. And so I ended up getting a little bit of thrush after. So then I did meet with a lactation consultant after for that. And she just gave me like because it was over the phone, she just gave me like an at-home all-purpose nipple ointment to make, which ended up being like a lifesaver throughout my breastfeeding journey, because I ended up just having this homemade concoction in a little Ziploc bag that I kept on my, again, Queen Carrie's like nursing card that I had next to our bed.
All hail the nursing cart.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to tag her.
I know.
I completely forgot that you had thrush. I remember that you had it in the beginning, but I had it too. And also another thing no one talks to you about: mastitis, clog ducts, thrush, all the stuff that you can get on your boobs, and then the thrush on your kid's mouth is disgusting. I remember my mom looked at it like right after Bent was born. She was like, "That's the grossest thing I've ever seen." And I'm like, it's disgusting and it hurts so bad. But like all of these things that it's like, what we're just supposed to like go and experience it and know what it is like in the moment. Like, I don't know why my boob feels like it's literally on fire, and when my kid's mouth is white, like how am I just supposed to know that?
Well, and also let's talk about that dangle feeding, where you basically are like a little cow with an udder to try and fix your clogged duct. That's the sexiest position I've ever put myself in.
We've had this conversation before of your husband trying to suck out your clogged duct.
It's a level of desperation that I think only a mom who has had it can understand. But there's just like, there's so many components of it that at least I sit back and I look at it and I'm like, there's either misinformation where it's either breastfeeding or not. There's either way too much information in the regards of like, oh, well, you should do this. You should do this. Like, do you know about this? Do we know about this? It's like,
yeah, and a feeling that if you have all the information, you'll be able to make the perfect decision, which is the other big fallacy that I got really stuck in, is like, there's so much information out there that I just don't have enough of the information to make an informed decision. And I kept trying to get more, and then I would be overwhelmed with it. And I'd be like, well, I can't, like, I can't have it both ways. I either I can't make a perfect decision, and I need to let go of that.
Mara, I was the same way beforehand. So I was like dedicated to breastfeeding and I did a ton of research beforehand. And when it all happened, it's like you have a human to take care of, to figure out how to get them to sleep as well. You are in diapers. You're trying to remember the last time you slept or ate. And it's like all this information that you took in was like in one ear, out the other.
Yeah.
So it's just like this constant cycle of, I feel like you, like second time moms can maybe attest, like at some point you just have to let it go and be like, okay, it's going to be what it's going to be. And I don't honestly know as a first-time mom if any of us can do that. Maybe you have a different personality than I do, but like I think it's like a part of you get past that process and you're just like learn to accept it.
Well, and I think it's something that like you have the mental ability and capacity to obsess about it when it's your first kid. And I'd imagine when you have more than one, I mean, maybe Sam and Julie, you could attest to this, that like part of it is just like, yes, you've done it before, but also you just like don't have the time when you have two kids running around to obsess about it as much. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot. I mean, Sam probably has a better answer than I do at this point because we were dealing with a lot of different things at the beginning with my second. But when we came home, we didn't put a lot of pressure on breastfeeding because he already wasn't breastfeeding from being in the NICU for 2 weeks. And when we were leaving the last couple of days and he was off the feeding tube, his basically last test to be able to go home was to get a full feed on his own, whether that's from a bottle or from a breast. And at that point, the only thing that was in my head is like, okay, he's taking a bottle. Give him a bottle. Let's do the bottle. Let's give him the bottle. Like bottle was all that was on my mind because I just wanted to take him home. So then once we got home, I said I was going to practice breastfeeding, but then you get home and you've got a toddler running around. You've got a mother-in-law that is there helping you because you just spent 2 weeks in the NICU. So yeah, life is crazy when you get home. So there isn't that big of a focus on doing what you feel like you have. You just kind of like the emotions just go.
I don't know if it's any different because Brantley's older too. That he was pretty self-sufficient. I mean, I look back at videos and like from then to now he has grown tremendously. Like he's like his own little person, like so independent now at 5. But whenever Callahan was like first born, he was still super helpful, and he still is like all about Callahan. Like everything is about Callahan and how he can help with Callahan, and and so I think that was a little bit different, but there's still those times where I feel like I'm a lot more like relaxed about it too, because we did have to go to formula with Brantley, so it was easier for me to be like, hey, like it's okay, like if it doesn't work out, and Adam would always be like, it's okay, like formula is okay, and I'm like, I know, you're right, like we've done this before. And so that was a lot easier the second time around to be a little bit more like, you know, if it doesn't go as planned, like we've already done the alternative plan, so it's okay.
Yeah. I just feel like there's so many conceptions to breastfeeding, but yet there's so many varying components of it and levels of it that just aren't talked about, at least in my opinion. It's all your own journey and it's hard to understand what that's going to be planning, but
Totally.
we've obviously all of us that are here today, our journeys look completely different from one another. And I think that that's like the biggest thing in my mind of everyone has what works for them, and if it works for you, it's right.
Exactly. That's like the biggest thing I feel like just in parenting in general.
Yeah.
So much information. Everyone's unique. You've got to just
and I
roll
think
with
also recognizing that it's important to constantly be checking in with yourself, and your partner can be really helpful with that, of like helping hold you accountable to checking in on how you're feeling about it, and that if you make a decision, it doesn't need to be a full decision. So Sam's decision to supplement with formula in the hospital didn't mean she was deciding to be on formula exclusively. And my decision to mostly do breastfeeding at the beginning didn't mean that I wasn't open to at some point later on supplementing with formula before we transitioned off into milk. Like you don't have to make a decision you can make a decision on what's right now and know that it can still have time to kind of like move around and not be like, I've made a decision in the hospital and that is going to be what it is moving forward.
Thank you guys for sharing your experiences. I really appreciate it. And we'll chat with you later, okay?
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Bye.